Why does trying harder to stop anxiety sometimes make it stronger? You tell yourself not to think about the presentation. Now it is the only thing you can think about. You tell your hands not to shake. Now you are watching every finger. You tell yourself that you must sleep because tomorrow matters. And suddenly sleep feels like an exam you are failing in real time. The original fear may be small, but then you become afraid of the fear itself. And that second fear builds a room around you. At 3:14 in the morning, Daniel Mercer was lying beside Elena, calculating how many hours remained before the Everline acquisition presentation. His heart was racing. His mouth was dry. He became convinced he would freeze in front of the board. For the next 3 days, Daniel did everything he could to guarantee that would not happen, and nearly caused it himself. Hi, I'm Sarah, and this is Wise Mind Stories. In this episode, we are going to explore anticipatory anxiety, why excessive effort and self-monitoring can intensify certain symptoms, and 2 logotherapy techniques, paradoxical intention and dereflection, that change your relationship to fear instead of demanding that fear vanish on command. This is an educational story, not personal medical advice. Severe, persistent, or disabling anxiety deserves support from a qualified mental health professional. Daniel had given hundreds of presentations. He knew the numbers better than anyone at Everline. But this presentation was different. If the board approved the integration plan, his promotion would become official. If he looked uncertain, Martin had warned him, the acquiring company might bring in its own operations leader. Daniel's mind built the scene in perfect detail. He would stand. His heart would accelerate. Someone would notice. His voice would tighten. He would lose the next sentence. Then every person in the room would understand that he had been promoted beyond his ability. By 3:30, he was no longer afraid of the presentation. He was afraid of his body revealing fear during the presentation. That is the architecture of anticipatory anxiety. We fear a symptom. The fear makes the symptom more likely. The symptom confirms the fear, and the loop becomes evidence for itself. Fear becomes a cage when we start fearing its return. The next evening, Daniel rehearsed in the kitchen. Sophie was building a paper model for school at the other end of the table. Regional performance improved 14.2%, Daniel began. His voice sounded dry. He started again. Regional performance improved. The scissors slipped from Sophie's hand and hit the floor. Daniel flinched. Can you do that somewhere else? Sophie looked up. I'm not doing anything. I need 20 minutes without noise. Elena entered the room. She has a project due too. Daniel felt heat rise into his face. This presentation affects whether I keep my job. And that makes her breathing too loud? The sentence was quiet. It stopped him. Daniel looked at Sophie gathering her paper from the table. He had spent years making his family absorb pressures they had not created. The anxiety he was hiding was already performing through him. Frankl used the term hyperintention for the way excessive striving can interfere with the very state we are trying to produce. Some experiences cannot be commanded directly. Sleep is one. Spontaneity is another. Confidence, pleasure, and even happiness often retreat when we make their immediate arrival a test of personal worth. Hyper-reflection adds another layer. We monitor ourselves so intensely that attention becomes trapped inside the symptom. How does my voice sound? Am I blushing? Did my hand move strangely? Do they know I am nervous? The person stops participating in the event and begins watching themselves participate. Daniel was no longer preparing to communicate. He was preparing to monitor Daniel. At the next counseling session, Elena mentioned that Daniel had not slept. Dr. Miriam Cole asked what he feared would happen during the presentation. I'll freeze. And if you notice your heart racing, I'll try to slow it down. And if your hands shake, I'll hide them. And if your voice tightens, I'll force it to relax. Miriam nodded. So while presenting a national operations plan, you will also be managing your heart, hands, voice, breathing, face, and everyone's opinion of you. Daniel heard the impossibility of the job. What am I supposed to do? Want to panic? For a brief exercise, she said. Something close to that. Frankl called the technique paradoxical intention. In carefully chosen situations, a person is invited to wish for, or humorously exaggerate, the very symptom they fear. Frankl describes, for example, a man troubled by excessive sweating who became afraid that others would notice it. The therapeutic invitation was to show people just how impressively much he could sweat. The goal was not humiliation. It was to create distance between the person and the fear. When someone can playfully intend the symptom is no longer operating as an all-powerful threat that must be prevented at any cost. The loop loses some of its fuel. Humor matters because it helps a person step outside the symptom without denying it. You are not the fear you are observing. Miriam asked Daniel to stand. Give me the first line of your presentation. He faced the bookshelf. Regional performance improved 14.2%. Too calm, she said. Your assignment is to give the most visibly nervous presentation Port Rowan has ever seen. Daniel stared at her. I'm serious. Try to make your hands shake. Show me a truly historic tremble. Daniel held out his hands and tried. Nothing happened. Come on, Miriam said. The city is counting on you. He exaggerated a vibration. Elena laughed. Daniel did too. The laughter did not cure his anxiety. It changed the power relationship. For the first time in 3 days, the possibility of shaking felt less like a verdict. Then Miriam asked a second question. Who needs what you know? Daniel described the regional managers who would inherit the integration plan, the night teams, waiting to learn whether efficiency meant better routing or fewer jobs. The clinics, depending on honest delivery estimates. Then the presentation is not a performance of your confidence, Miriam said. It is an act of service to their decisions. This is dereflection. Instead of directing more attention toward the self and the symptom, attention is redirected toward a person, purpose, or task beyond the self. It connects to another central Franklian idea, self-transcendence. Human beings often become most fully themselves not by endlessly inspecting the self, but by reaching toward work to be done or a person to be loved. Daniel did not need to feel calm before he could communicate clearly. He needed to care more about the truth in the room than about looking fearless inside it. Confidence watches the self. Purpose watches the task. On presentation morning, Daniel had slept 4 hours. His heart was still fast. In the elevator, he said quietly, "Let's see if I can break the company record for visible nervousness." The corner of his mouth lifted. Then he looked at the first slide and asked, "Who needs what I know?" At 9, the boardroom doors closed. At 9:07, Daniel's hand trembled once while he changed slides. He noticed. He did not hide it. The feared catastrophe did not arrive. At 9:18, a director interrupted him. Your report shows 97% on-time performance. The clinic audit shows 92. Explain the gap. Daniel knew this number. 5% of Everline's late medical deliveries had been classified as customer-caused exceptions. Some were legitimate. Clinics closed early, addresses were wrong, recipients were unavailable. But not all. Dispatch software had failed during 2 high-volume weekends. Those delays belonged to Everline. Martin spoke before Daniel could answer. Different reporting windows. The director turned to Daniel. Is that correct? Daniel felt his heart strike hard against his chest. This was the moment he had feared. But the danger was not that he would look nervous. The danger was that calmness would help him tell a lie. He looked at the audit page. The windows differ, he said. But that doesn't explain the full gap. Some late deliveries were reclassified after software failures. I need to reconcile the records before I call 97% accurate. The room changed. Martin did not look at him again. Daniel completed the presentation. His voice tightened twice. He lost one line and found it again. The board asked difficult questions. He answered the ones he could. He said, "I don't know," to the ones he could not. It was not the smoothest presentation of his career. It was the first one in years that he did not observe from outside his own body. Afterward, Priya met him near the elevators. "You contradicted Martin." I corrected the number. That is not how he will describe it. The elevator doors opened. Martin was standing inside. "Daniel," he said. "My office. Now." Paradoxical intention had helped Daniel loosen the fear of his symptoms. It could not tell him what to do with the freedom that returned. That required responsibility. And responsibility was waiting on the 22nd floor. Here is a small experiment for today. Choose a mild, familiar fear, not a severe trauma response, and not a symptom that places you or anyone else in danger. Name the feared symptom. Then, for 10 seconds, give it a playful invitation. Let me blush with Olympic-level brilliance. Let me produce the most dramatic, awkward pause in this meeting. Notice whether humor creates even 1 inch of distance. Then ask, who needs what I can give in this moment? Move your attention toward that person or task. If anxiety is persistent, severe, or restricting your life, use this episode as a reason to speak with a qualified professional, not as a reason to struggle alone. This is Sarah, and this is Wise Mind Stories. You do not need to defeat every sensation before you can act. Sometimes freedom begins when fear is allowed to be present without being placed in charge. If this helped you see anxiety differently, subscribe to Wise Mind Stories. In Martin's office, Daniel learned that the inaccurate number was not an isolated reporting mistake. The acquisition depended on it. Martin wanted every failed delivery recoded before the final audit. If Daniel refused, his promotion would disappear, and the layoffs could expand to Priya's entire team. If he obeyed, patience would carry the risk hidden inside Everline's success. Daniel had spent the week asking how not to look afraid. Now life was asking a more important question. What will you do when the meaningful choice is the one that costs you most? Next episode, teaser. Daniel is no longer trapped by the need to look fearless. That freedom exposes a harder demand. Everline wants him to hide failures that could affect patients, while refusing may cost his promotion and Priya's team. What does life ask when no answer leaves you unharmed?